Namaskar and welcome to In Focus. The Bhabani Sengupta affair, as it's come to be called, has raised several important questions. How much did the Prime Minister know? Why did he act the way he did? And what are the implications and consequences of all that's happened? Here to explore these critical questions is the gentleman at the center of the controversy, Professor Sengupta. Professor Sengupta, it's now 3 weeks since the controversy surrounding your appointment as officer on special duty in the Prime Minister's office and your subsequent resignation. Would you accept that you were eminently qualified for the job you got?
Well, I was the best man he could get. That's why he took me.
And in this case, you're also then saying that the allegations made in Parliament, that you were unfit for the job, that your views were anti-national, that somehow you couldn't be trusted with confidential information, those allegations were unfair and unfounded.
Well, the allegations are one thing. The Prime Minister's reaction or non-reaction to that is another thing.
Absolutely, and let's take them separately. Let's begin with the allegations.
The allegations are absolutely absurd, and they don't stand on any evidence.
Then tell me something.
And because members of Parliament are immune to, to legal activity, you cannot take them to a court of law.
Because they have privilege if they make these allegations within the Lok Sabha.
As soon as they are speaking within Parliament.
So what you're saying is you were defamed and you were libelled, but because it happened in the Lok Sabha, you can't do anything about it.
Because it's happened in Lok Sabha, I cannot do anything about it. But I'm doing something. I'm at every interview in my writings, I'm just saying how absurd the whole thing is.
Have any of these people who raised these allegations within the confines of the Lok Sabha had the courage to raise them outside?
Well, I wish some of them, at least one of them, raised this outside.
Who are we talking about,
the
Mr.
former
Chandrasekhar?
Prime Minister Chandrasekhar, who started the whole thing.
If he raises it outside, what will you do?
I'll sue him.
You'll sue him?
I'll sue him.
For criminal libel?
For criminal liability.
That's a very clear statement from you that you have been libelled, and you before that said that you were far and away the best person for the job. Then explain one conundrum to me. Why did the Prime Minister accept your resignation?
Well, I will not answer any question about the Prime Minister, why he did or did not anything, do anything.
You're being a gentleman, aren't you?
I'm his friend.
Was he as good a friend to you?
Well, just because, he did something in a 20-year-old relationship, just because he tripped once, I don't hold this against him. That's not that kind of a friendship.
All right. I appreciate your position. It's an honorable position. Let me explore a little, for the record's sake, how well you knew the Prime Minister. Am I right in believing that you have known Mr. Gujral for something like 20 years?
Will be at least for 20 years.
And therefore, would I be right in believing that he knows your views, your opinions on foreign policy completely and thoroughly?
Look, he not only knows me inside out, his foreign policy has been crafted together. He and me, more than anyone else. We have talked about it, discussed it. I've given him theoretical framework. It's a very joint effort, and he knows it.
So clearly, when he appointed you as officer on special duty, he was doing it because he wanted you near him.
I guess so.
And he was doing it because he thought you were far and away the best person for the job.
I thought that well, let me put it like this. I did not ask for this job. We had talked about my keeping close to him, proximity. And he said that, well, I don't think you should come to the bureaucracy. I completely agreed with that. And we were talking about other ways of my staying close to him without being in the bureaucracy. And he made one or two suggestions. He had ideas, which I'm not going to disclose. And I said, fine. I said, the only problem is that as long as you are foreign minister, I was going any time I wanted to, I was going to your house. Your time was, you were accessible, far more accessible. Now as Prime Minister, your term is very short. And there's a huge load upon him. You're not only Prime Minister, you also have charge of foreign affairs. So I don't get the time with you. And I feel uncomfortable. Because when we have been together, we have been productive.
So the job of officer on special duty was to facilitate nearness as Prime Minister?
proximity to the Prime Minister.
Then it also follows that at no point could Mr. Gujral ever have thought that you were anti-national or that you couldn't be trusted with confidential papers.
Of course not. No, see, he never, now let's understand this. He never said that I would be in charge of foreign affairs. He never gave me an allocation of portfolios. It was too short a time, day and a half, and Parliament was in session. It is absolutely the assumption by others that I would be in charge of foreign affairs, that I would put foreign policy upside down or downside up, you know, that the Foreign Office people are quaking in anger, that there's consternation in the Foreign Office, all lies.
Absolutely. In fact, the only person who knew exactly what your responsibilities would be was Mr. Gujral.
And he had not given me foreign affairs.
And the only person who knew that you wouldn't be turning things upside down was Mr. Gujral.
Yes, and he...
And the only person who knew that these allegations made in Parliament, that you're anti-national, that you can't be trusted, were just rubbish, was Mr. Gujral.
I'm sure he was the first person to know that.
Then let me come back to the question you wouldn't answer a minute ago.
I would not answer that question.
Why did he let you resign?
Well, I don't know. I really don't know.
You said he tripped up.
I thought, you know, he did not ask me to resign. Then again, let's put it on record. He did not ask me to resign.
You did the honorable thing by resigning.
I thought that he was feeling embarrassed by what was happening in Parliament. I did not believe that he cared a hoot for what was written in the newspapers. There were only 2 newspapers.
So you were very surprised when he accepted your resignation.
But when it happened in Parliament, I thought he was a bit rattled. And when he asked me whether I was watching, and I said, he said, there's a lot of attack on you. I said, are you embarrassed? He did not answer. I said, I'm sending you my resignation immediately. You don't have to be embarrassed.
What did he say to that?
Nothing.
What you're saying to me is that you chose to sacrifice that office you had been given because you thought it was a way of helping your friend.
I thought that it was not an office worth keeping to embarrass my friend.
Tell me something. When he accepted the resignation, did he ever ring you and explain why he'd done it?
No, he sent me a very sweet letter.
But he never spoke to you on the phone?
No.
Has he spoken to you at all about this in person?
No.
You mean in 3 weeks he's never once broached this subject?
No.
Professor Sengupta, this is incredible. You offered a sacrifice to help a friend. That's what it was. And in acknowledging it, he never once, as a human being in personal contact, said anything to you.
I don't hold this against him. I know I.K. Gujral, very sensitive, very nice, very good man.
But from what you're saying,
I'm sure he felt very embarrassed.
But from what you're saying, other than a letter, he didn't pick up the phone to express this sensitivity.
No, he did not. He had nothing to say.
In fact, from what I've read, his wife is the one who phoned you.
Yes, his wife called me next morning.
He didn't come on the line himself?
No.
Tell me something. It's not just that the Prime Minister accepted your resignation. There's another aspect of the whole thing. He failed to defend you. You were his choice. You've known him for 20 years. He appointed you. You were being unfairly attacked in Parliament, and he kept completely silent. How do you account for that?
It has been a mystery to me, but I will not go any further in this. That was his decision, why he did not defend me or defend himself. It was not a question of defending me.
Was this in keeping with his character? Had you ever seen these sort of tendencies in him earlier?
Not that I know. I did not see that at all before. You know, he was a straightforward man. He could be firm. And I was very surprised that why is he so shaken by what was happening in Parliament? Just because 2 former prime ministers said something, and one prime minister was a satellite prime minister of the Congress party. The other was there for 13 or 17 days, I don't quite remember, because they had chosen to say something, and he was so shaken. I did not understand.
A lot of people feel that by failing to defend you, in fact, not you, by failing to defend his choice, he showed weakness?
Now, Karan, you are a very, very expert television, what do I say, advocate. And don't bring me to a situation when I may be forced to say something about Gujarat that I don't want to say.
No, I won't bring you to that position. But the great prime ministers of the world defend their choices and defend their right to appoint whoever they want to their personal office. Mr. Gujral didn't do that.
To that extent, I would say that he probably made his own position weaker.
Do you think he also, in a sense, allowed himself to be bullied by people like Chandrasekhar and Vajpayee?
How can Chandrasekhar bully him? And how can Atal Bihari Vajpayee bully him?
But then why did he let you go?
I
if
don't
it
know.
wasn't under pressure?
You see, if you're a congressman, you know, a spokesman of the Congress party, he could have bullied him. But not these two former prime ministers.
One looks for backbone and spine in a prime minister. You're an honest man. Would you accept that in handling this, Mr. Gujral didn't show a lot of spine and backbone?
I won't comment on that.
He took the easy
You
way
are
out.
again bringing me to the to comment on Gujral's
Okay.
pluses and minuses.
Let me put it differently. You are a writer, you are a foreign policy analyst, and you're a man of considerable standing in your own right. How does the Prime Minister emerge out of this whole incident? Answer me that.
Look, you are like now you're like a prosecutor.
No.
You are bringing me back to this in another way. How he fared, how he looked, is up to the people to judge.
But he hasn't covered himself with glory, has he?
In my estimation, he figured pathetically. And I felt very sorry for him. Because I admire him, I love him, he's a very, very good man. But what happened to him? He was in Parliament. Was he too lonely? Wasn't there anyone around him who he could consult? I don't know this. These are the questions I have been asking. Why did he do that?
Would you like to ask him that question?
When I meet him, maybe, maybe not. 3 weeks, now before I meet him, it will be 3 months.
Does it also hurt that at a personal level he let you down? At a personal level?
How can he let me down? In fact, he let me up. I became a national figure. I had a far larger audience, you know, to take my case to.
But except
these are
that,
important cases. See, these are not personal matters.
except that when you want a friend to defend you and the friend doesn't defend you, then it hurts, doesn't it?
Well, I'm not going to answer that question.
But it has hurt, isn't it?
Well, even it did, it's not very much.
But it has hurt.
I've forgotten all that.
Do you think it will have affected a 20-year relationship with Mr. Gujral?
No, not from my side. I'm still editing his book, a book on foreign policy with his speeches and lectures and all that. A great deal of them drafted by me.
And you're editing it with the same commitment and the same dedication as previously?
Of course.
So what you're saying is, as far as you're concerned, the relationship hasn't changed. But from what you've said, it also emerges that as far as he's concerned, for the last 3 weeks, he hasn't spoken to you.
No, he gave me time, gave me an appointment one of these days. He didn't give me an appointment. I was told that I would see that there will be appointment for me the next day.
But it never happened.
He did not come.
Do you think he's a little nervous of meeting you? Do you think he feels guilty?
Well, I wouldn't say that. He's too busy. You know, a prime minister is a prime minister.
Too
There's
busy
much
to
on
meet
him.
a friend whose resignation he was forced to accept? Too busy to pick up the phone?
I think his phone is always very busy.
We're going to have to take a break at that point, Professor Sengupta, but I want to come back in part 2. I want to talk to you about other aspects of this very interesting incident. But first, I'm afraid we have to take a commercial break. Don't go away. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes to continue this discussion with Professor Sengupta. Welcome back to part 2. Professor, there's another aspect to this whole thing. Were you surprised that within virtually 24 hours of your becoming OSD in the PMO, a 23-year-old letter that you had written to the New York Times suddenly appeared in the hands of former Prime Minister Chandrasekhar? Did that surprise you?
Yeah, that's very strange and very mysterious.
How do you think it got there?
Well, there are rumors about it all over the town, and I have no proof.
But what are those rumors?
Well, I've been told pretty reliably that a BJP intellectual who once wrote a thesis on nuclear issues used my letter, and he said that he has a copy of that letter, and that copy went to Chandrasekhar.
Are you also suggesting that people like Mr. Chandrasekhar were put up to it? Put up to attacking you?
Chandrasekhar has personally nothing against me as far as I know. But he took up this case.
And at the behest of a BJP intellectual?
And he also is reported to have told people that he was misled
He said that afterwards?
afterwards. That's what people tell me.
So in other words, what you're saying is that Chandrasekhar was used, realized he'd been used, and then said he'd been misled.
I'll go a little further. I would suggest that Mr. Chandrasekhar either did not read the letter, or did not understand the letter, or did not understand the language in that letter. And because even then he knew that his case was a little weak, he said there is another letter in which I had suggested international intervention. But where is that letter?
There is no such letter.
There is no such letter. And he said that...
So a former Prime Minister on the floor of the Lok Sabha was either irresponsible or ignorant or used by someone for their own so far unknown purposes, or perhaps all three.
Manish Shankar wrote in an article that he was no longer a member of parliament, he did not have to use parliamentary language. And he said that Mr. Chandrasekhar lied.
And that's your position as well?
That's what I believe.
The interesting thing is that in 1974, at the time of the Pokhran implosion, Mr. Chandrasekhar criticized it much as you did at that time, didn't he?
I guess so, as far as I remember.
So then how can he turn around and suddenly call your position anti-national when he shared that position 20 years ago?
Mr. Chandrasekhar should go to this what is Lok Adalat or something, and then
Go and incriminate himself, you're saying?
and sit there as I did for 1 hour, and this question should be put to him. He has run away.
Before Mr. Chandrasekhar raised the issue supported by Mr. Vajpayee in Parliament, the press had brought it up. Do you think that there was a campaign in the press against you?
No, only 2 newspapers.
Why were they gunning for you?
Well, I don't know. I absolutely have no idea at all. But one newspaper insinuated that, well, first of all, assumed that I would be in charge of foreign policy. Then went on to suggest that I'll be in charge of foreign affairs.
This is the Indian Express.
No, that's an Asian Age. And said that the bureaucracy was livid in anger. And they were afraid that I'd put Indian foreign policy on its head.
Are you saying that the hand of the bureaucracy can be detected behind what these 2 newspapers wrote?
As far as I've tried to inquire, the Foreign Office bureaucracy were totally innocent. You see, the Foreign Office is full of my friends.
So then how do you explain the fact that 2 newspapers carried out what looks like a single campaign to get you?
There surely are interest groups in Delhi. Persons, institutions, or maybe political parties who thought the combination of Gujral and me in the Prime Minister's office would be dangerous to their line of thinking.
Who are these interest groups?
It is not Parliament.
Hint at them.
No, maybe people who are involved with the nuclear policy, they want India to go for nuclear.
Are we talking about the Strategic Defense Services Institute?
I'm not mentioning any institute. I'm not also mentioning people by name. People who probably thought that the nuclear policy would not go farther.
Let me put it like this. You exonerated the bureaucracy a moment ago, but now it seems you're talking about something I would call the foreign policy establishment. Is that the correct way of phrasing
The
it?
foreign policy establishment on the peripheries, not the core establishment on foreign policy.
So they turned against you and they put the newspapers up to this attack against you.
Looks like to me.
Okay. Let me then come back to an issue I began
And
with.
then people who are against good neighborly cooperative relations with Pakistan.
So there was a BJP element in this as well, you suspect?
That is possible that some BJP elements were there.
Okay. Let me come back to the question that I raised several times in part one, and I want to do it now in the light of what you've just been saying. All of this is something Mr. Gujral should have sensed. He should have understood, shouldn't he?
Why don't you have an interview with him?
Well, because I probably won't get it. That's why I'm asking you. You know him probably better than anyone else.
Well, I'm sure he fumed within.
Let me ask you this simple question. Would this have happened if Mr. Gujral was only External Affairs Minister?
No, it would never have happened.
So what went wrong when he became Prime Minister that meant this happened?
Two things in my thinking. One is that he was very new to the job. In the External Affairs Ministry, he never handled power. You know, in the Prime Minister's office, he was all the time overwhelmed by the question of power. Bargaining, pressures, all kinds of things,
And he's unused to handling power.
which he has never done that before.
And what's the second thing?
The second was that he was very new to the job. That he had a feeling that, look, let's go back a little bit to the background. He was very reluctant to be Prime Minister. I had mentioned to him more than a year ago that he was very suitable for that post compared to the politicians you have around. He said, no, that's a dirty office. I don't want to go there.
And I believe in April, when it became possible, you and his wife had to actually push him into accepting.
Well, pushing probably is a little too strong a word, but we persuaded him,
You and his wife.
his wife and me.
So what you're saying is that his inexperience and his inability to effectively handle power meant that he tripped himself up.
No, that would be very harsh judgment. His inexperience, yes, and he's new to the game of power. And look at the position of the Prime Minister. His own party is a group of 14 units.
What
And the
you're
Congress
saying,
Party.
forgive my interrupting because time is against us, but what you're saying is that he didn't know how to handle power, and the first time he had to do it, he made a little bit of a mess of it.
Karan, this was the third or fourth day of his prime ministership.
That's the excuse.
No, that's the reason.
Okay, whatever the reason, but he didn't acquit himself as well as he should have or might have.
Well, he probably should have. He probably wanted to, but somehow or other he did not.
There, I'm afraid, Professor Sengupta, we're going to have to end this interview. Thank you very much for talking so openly on a subject that is so painful and probably so personal. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
That's it for this week. We'll be back next week with another interviewee. But for today, from the residence of Professor Sengupta in New Delhi, goodbye.